back to another episode of Sync Riffs. Want to welcome to the studio very special guest, Ivor Novello-nominated composer Chris Roe. Good morning, good evening to you, Chris, in the UK. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Charles.
No, I appreciate you taking the time and really excited to be able to sit down in the next hour or so and chat about some of your amazing work as a composer. And one of the projects from the producers of The Crown, The Lady, that stars Mia McKenna-Bruce and Natalie Dormer. And I believe, correct, it's streaming now on here in the US, it's BritBox, and in the UK, it's ITVX.
Correct, yes.
And Chris, before we kind of unpack and look under the hood, so to speak, on this psychological thriller, wanted to kind of find out, Chris, some of your musical influences, because, having looked at a lot of the shows and soundtracks that you worked on, I see a through line, and I'm curious your musical inspiration, how that might have an interplay with you as a composer.
Yeah, it's something that I really try to absorb everything that I listen to and listen to as much as possible. I think I'm drawn to composers that have a more kind of experimental approach to sound. Uh, I mean, composers that like jump to mind are kind of Jonny Greenwood. I've been listening to his score for One Battle After Another a lot
Mm.
recently, and I just love how his scores borrow from sort of contemporary classical, like more experimental music, but then use them in such a visceral way.
Mm.
Yeah, I think finding like experimental, cool sounds and textures, but then having a real like emotional heart as well really
Yeah.
kind of appeals to me and so yeah, that's he's definitely been a big influence on me for sure.
Very nice. I'll have to check out some of his works. I'm a huge fan, and I'm dating myself. I worked at EMI Capitol Records in the '90s, so
Mm.
having watched like Danny Boyle, Train Spotting, and a lot of the British productions, and then at EMI coming up on all the British acts there. But I think with The Lady, you did some amazing work, and I see you're sitting in your studio there, and there's
Mhm.
the wicked Roland Juno 60, which played a part on the equipment side of scoring and creating sort of an 80s, 90s palette that gradually really tied into the motif of Jane's unraveling psyche in the film. And I'm curious, Chris, because as a composer, I know each project that you work on has different challenges, different expectations, and I'm curious what you did to prepare for working on the soundtrack and score for The Lady.
Yeah, I suppose my way in for this project was really thinking about Jane's character and her. It's complicated because so Jane Andrews, it's a true story. She works at Buckingham Palace, got this amazing job as Fergie's dresser, and then so kind of whirlwind ride from sort of growing up in like the north of England and then getting swept up into this royal sort of world that she wasn't familiar with. But then
Mhm.
it's a tragic story really because she eventually ends up getting fired from the palace, and then she um, she is a very kind of obsessive character and ends up being convicted for killing her boyfriend, for murdering her boyfriend. And so she was really, me and Lee, the director, were talking a lot about how to not make the audience feel kind of sorry for her because she is a convicted murderer, but at the same time, you do warm to her throughout the series because you can see how vulnerable she is and how she goes through various different kind of abusive relationships, and you can in a lot of ways she's a victim. So
Mm.
I suppose I tried to think about musically how to create something that's very fragile and gives a sense of and what might be going on inside her head.
Right.
So I wrote a lot of music before, as they were shooting, um, and as the early edit started kind of coming through. I read the script, so I knew there's a lot of insight already on that I could write for. Yeah, that was kind of my way of preparing really for this as much as possible, and also thinking about the setting. So
Yeah.
Buckingham Palace is actually only in really the first 1.5 episodes,
Mm.
but I think coming into it and obviously knowing it was from Left Bank, the Crown producers, that was sort of
Yes.
in my head as well. Of that, lots of kind of glass chandeliers and sort of
Mm.
how to get some of that into the music as well. So there's a lot of string quartet and
Mhm. Mhm.
a kind of glassy sounds actually as well. Yeah.
Yes. What you did brilliantly, Chris, is, blending those glassy strings, harmonics, a lot of dissonance. And I know, from the production side, pitch bending, tape wobble, and just that emotional raw sound. And I pulled up the soundtrack here up on Spotify. And as I was doing as I try to, at least at the end of the day, for that meditative walk, I had the soundtrack queued up, and there were a couple cues that really jumped out at me. One was Let You Go. And I know, and we'll share it in the playback, but you were a guest on someone's podcast and did sort of a cue breakdown talking about the use of the Juno, and to kind of bookend that chat that you had with the host, you mentioned something that I really gravitated towards. You were talking about, building the structure of the song like an architect so that you don't fall into certain patterns. If you're scoring something to picture, if you want to touch on that with that cue, or in general for some of these cues, what's some of the things that you do so that you can kind of, I think, I'm paraphrasing, but you use a term where you kind of you set some guidelines, if you will.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's at the start of a project, taking something from the kind of overall idea of the show, or like we were talking about obsession or like paranoia for Jane, and setting up some sort of I find it useful to set up some kind of rules of the game, or like things to, in some ways, like when you start something creatively, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
So something to sort of focus you in a certain direction. It might be, I think for this, yeah, the sound was important, of to get the sound of the 80s and 90s, by using by kind of featuring the Juno quite a lot. Yeah, and so, or like the idea of a glassy sound, because it's not only about the royalty sort of like chandeliers on the ceiling, but also about something like breaking and snapping, and so like following those kind of thoughts, and like that leads to certain, okay, I'll try and use these kind of sounds or these kind of instruments, or even, this chord progression, or like something that I'll come back to. And it's not that those rules can't be broken, and but I find that it starts you off with a sort of, it maybe pushes me in a direction that I wouldn't normally go in if I just sat down at the piano, and can kind of throw up some interesting results that then you can kind of follow, and then, when you're into the weeds of it, and working to picture, then you can
Mhm.
just trust your gut, and resonate with the scene emotionally, and but you've kind of got this palette of sounds, or a bigger kind of structure to work within, I guess. I think it's really, yeah, it's a way
Yeah.
of getting away from the blank page, or the blank screen.
Mm. I love that, and I can only imagine, given the pace of, especially if it's a series and working under tighter deadlines. Because you ever have those moments? How do you kind of be zen where you work on a piece and say, "Oh, that's perfect. I'm going to leave it," or do you come back and say, "Well, maybe I'm gonna add another layer here, or maybe take out something." What's kind of that push and pull process like?
It is, yeah. There's a lot of push and pull, and it's funny trying. I also kind of write music outside of film and TV, like, side projects that, but it's so hard to finish them because of that perfectionist sort of, or like push and pull between, is it ready? So I kind of, in some ways, I really like the deadline, because it gets you to, and also I like the fact that I'm handing it over to. I think I've now made peace that it's not the final stage. You hand it over to the mix, and then
Yeah.
things get rearranged or changed. That's helpful, I think, that it's going through another set of ears
Yeah.
and part of something bigger. But I mean, what I do um, often, what I really love is kind of working with real players, and so often that's rather than spending a lot of time sort of programming something to sound perfect or something. I enjoy the process of like handing it over to a player, and then they're playing what I've written, but they not only does it just sound amazing when they play it, but also they'll bring something else to it, and then it's becoming instantly like more of a collaboration. And yeah, so that's a really important part of the process, I think, and particularly on
Hmm.
this cue you were talking about, Let You Go. It
Hmm.
features the strings a lot, and um, that really sort of takes it into a much more, a much grander kind of space.
Yes, and the other cue I wanted to touch on because it felt, Chris, you know, had a trailer dynamic. I could hear it in a trailer with the
Oh
builds
yeah,
and the tension, and I think the cue was straight to voicemail.
oh yeah.
Yeah, and I'm remiss because that cue, straight to voicemail, what particular scene, if you want to talk about that? And yeah,
Yes.
that's mhm.
Yeah, it's funny. I agonize over the titles of these a little bit. So I'm trying to. It was used in a few places, but this particular first use of it was when her boyfriend goes away and kind of leaves her. He goes on a stag do to somewhere in Europe. I can't remember. With all the guys, and so she's left at home and is panicking instantly about he's not picking up the phone. She's like, where is he? What's he doing? Who's he met? And so
Yeah.
yeah, it keeps going to voicemail. And she kind of the way they cut the scene, it sort of like does jump cuts in time, and she's got like a glass of wine, and it's the evening draws on, and she's becoming much like more and more obsessive and frantic, and yeah, and again you just really kind of feel for her because she's really struggling. So yeah, that cue has a lot of kind of breathy vocals and kind of glitchy sounds, and I think it's sort of all on one bass note really that kind of builds like from the Juno and maybe Prophet synth as well. Like so again, it's like yeah, kind of music of the time a little bit weaving its way in there, but yeah, it has this kind of like paranoid anxiety to it.
Very nice. Yes. And Chris, I noticed with that track also, if you want to talk about the percussion elements in that track in particular, because I'm curious, Chris, as a composer I know every track is different, but do you lay down the structure of the Roland first? Do you come up with that melody and main harmony, or are the drums sort of the skeleton of the song, at least on that cue, straight to
I think
voicemail? Mhm.
Yeah, I think on that cue it was I often start with the synth as a sort of semi like improvised kind of idea. Like if it's a gradual build as well, like gradually kind of opening up the filter and then I'll probably have something that's too long and it's like loosely to picture. I've got the
Mm.
picture there, but it's a starting point and then I can go into the audio file and like chop it up a little bit and like refine it. But it's like a one performance, I guess, that's then edited. But I think for that sort of cue, it's really that as the central thing, and then everything else is like sort of tacked on to it. Like, yeah, I mean, it's not always like that, but for that
Sure.
cue, I think, and then it's a question of like the drums, this kind of like drum breaks,
Hmm.
which really were used. That was more kind of suiting the cut really, and like really sort of highly synchronized with these fast cuts and yeah, I try and find like try and get as much percussive energy out of things that aren't drums as well. Like the breathy kind of vocals, and then putting them through lots of rhythmic delays and things. So you kind of you get, I guess it's more pulse than percussion, but it's that I find works well as well. On a practical level with TV and film.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
it sort of has an ability to like have an energy under the surface. But I found actually in the mix, I think some of those drum layers got taken out, for example, because it's like it's interfering with something on the screen, or it makes it
Yeah.
feel a bit too much like a track or something. Like so, yeah. It's about trying to have that energy with something quite minimal as well.
Yes, I can imagine like you said, Chris, doing what ultimately at the end, what is best and right for the picture and the narrative on screen. And I see in your studio there, and I'm curious, Chris, is sort of finding that balance now with all your plugins and DAW and then hardware-based gear. What's kind of your, approach and do you blend things 50/50 with the plugins in your DAW, or because I can imagine that's an endless rabbit hole that you could go down on the gear side.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I think I've sort of got a few pieces over the years and then stuck with them and tried to like get as much out of them as possible, like the kind of more vintage gear. I'm definitely not like you see some composers that have like a whole like wall full of stuff, like or three walls. I think I try to kind of get what I can out of the real stuff, and I do use a lot of sample instruments, but I'll often also sample other things in the studio and try and make my own instruments out of that, or like so that's really kind of I find that really kind of exciting as well, like trying to when you're trying to come up with a sound for the sampling something that's just around you, or like I did this show that was set in Mexico in the jungle and sort of sampled. I bought a few kind of cheap like ocarinas and instruments like that, and then sampled them and made a weird like hybrid synth out of those. But yeah, I definitely have some sample libraries that I fall back on a lot, and like the Spitfire libraries I use a lot for the strings and sort of but I find sometimes there's so much in them that it's a bit overwhelming to, I don't know. I find the weirder, smaller libraries actually now more interesting. Maybe now that I've got my sort of base of other things, finding some kind of odd, more unique sounds, or making them from what's around me, I think.
Yeah, so interested and fascinating. I'm just curious, with the production that was shot in Mexico,
Right.
did that happen to be the film you worked on, Nine Bodies in a
Mex-
more? Yes, amazing.
Yeah, so that was a show. It was for sort of BBC and MGM Plus in the States, kind of like a murder mystery in the jungle, a little bit like Lost meets Agatha Christie, is what one of the reviews said. So, yeah, that was great fun to work on something that instantly had it kind of gave you permission to use a lot of character in the instrumentation without like it. If I tried to do that in The Lady, it would have felt really out of place. There's nothing on screen that's giving that sort of oddness, I suppose. But this was all like about the jungle and like animals watching what was going on and stuff. Snakes and frogs and stuff. So it's kind of it gives you instant like permission to explore some interesting sounds.
Very nice. And that's actually a great segue, because I know you had worked and scored the production called Bad Apples, and that there was balancing comedy with tension through rhythm, contrast, and tonal misdirection. And if you want to talk about, I guess it premiered at the 2025 Toronto International Film Festival, and it's going to be released worldwide by Republic Pictures. And it follows a teacher, Ronan, navigating a deeply unsettling school environment after a troubled student disappears. So, in a quote about the score, that it described your work as omnipresent, thunderous, and almost villainous. It amplifies the film's dark satirical tone. Would love to hear more about what that was like working on Bad Apples, and was the Juno, or what instruments sort of became the star for that sonically?
Yeah, I mean, I really loved working on Bad Apples, and yeah, very excited for it to come out as well, because it was so musically. So yeah, it's set in a school. It's also about like the school system and how it kind of doesn't suit everyone, and like there's this bad kid in the class, the bad apple, who kind of isn't, the system doesn't work for him. So we were again, like the overall like concept was about like music that felt quite like had a kind of minimalist like rhythmic energy to it for the kind of system, and like the cogs in the machine, and then putting like a spanner in the works, you know, like so a lot of the music has a sort of marching energy to it. My idea for it was almost like a school marching band gone wrong. So like,
Yeah.
you know, like in, I don't know, in high school you have those kind of like concert band or something that they have like 20 flutes and like whatever instruments people play kind of thing, and the flute is popular, and then and recorders and like saxophones and kind of. So for that one it was a purely sort of, I guess, classical score, in that there's actually no synths really, very kind of acoustic, and almost everything is live as well without samples. And so it sort of had to have this like cheekiness to it in a way, but also I guess they didn't want the film to feel, they wanted you to feel like you could laugh from the beginning, even though there's some really dark things happening. So it was one of those, right from the first frame, the music is like hits you. There's this big timpani drum roll, and then it goes through the first, like, it's almost like an overture. The first sequence, you see this cider pressing machine, so like all these apples going through the machine, and then a shoe gets thrown into it by this. So it's kind of, it's all one big metaphor from the beginning, and musically it's like sets out its stool from the beginning. That I hopefully, the idea is that it makes the audience feel like, okay, I know this isn't like a serious, you know, a serious drama that I have to feel kind of respectful about it. It's got a kind of fable kind of quality to it. And so yeah, it was really fun. And Jonathan, the director, he's really knowledgeable about classical music, and would often, like, you know, even mock something up, or like we talk a lot about, like, you know, big composers from like the 1800s, and sort of like, so actually not using, usually it's like the references are other film scores or other, but he was really talking about, you know, Stravinsky or kind of Rachmaninoff, or, you know, like those kind of giants. So a lot of fun, and yeah, out later this year.
Very nice, very nice. And I'll pull it up in a minute. I was going to pull up the key art for that, but because I'm always curious, Chris, similarly, because depending if a production is filmed in the UK, or say you happen to be in that local, say it's in Sweden, you happen to be there. Tell me about, as a composer, being able to have the benefit, if you're on set, you get to kind of, you know, see things in person and walk away with an impression of the environment, versus, you know, maybe you're seeing the playback, you're seeing the initial cuts. How often do you get to be, you know, does that interplay occur, being able to be at the physical location of where something might be shot?
Rarely. I've been on set once for a show I did called Wolf, and it was really fun to see the process. And yeah, that was set in, I got a sense of the setting for that, and even just driving there, it was set in Wales, so kind of just you maybe absorb something about like the landscape or that sort of thing. I think it's fun to see how it all works, but I think it's there's a lot going on, isn't there, on set, and everyone's sort of stressed and like doing their own thing, and kind of, maybe if you spent like a full week or two and really kind of sat back and observed it. But what I do find really useful, like for Bad Apples, I went over to Stockholm a few times to sit down with Jonathan and Robert, the editor, and like somehow, being in the same room and being able to watch the cut together and discuss things. And I find that really useful, rather than, you know, doing it over, you know, working remotely. And even if it's only for some of the process, kind of, because I think you can try, you know, I brought a few things on my laptop to play them, which if I'd sent them, I think it feels more like a presentation.
Right.
Maybe I wouldn't have shown them everything, or like, you get a sense straight away, don't you, if someone's into it or not, and you can. So yeah, I think physical location for like the work, for the editing process, and even I've had directors in the studio as well, kind of working on things together. I think that's really, really great. But maybe I'd like to, I mean, it's fun to go to set, but
Yeah.
and maybe for some things you'd really get a real sense of it, but yeah.
Yes, no, indeed. No, I bring that up because I had a chat with a music supervisor the other day who's
Oh yeah.
lamenting because she used to work on set at Warner Brothers, and now with working from home and losing that connection, being able to, as a music supervisor, the physical seeing wardrobe and just being in the hub and that energy of a production. But thanks for your insight on that. And I think one thing to talk about with Bad Apples, Chris, is you had to really, with the score and the composition, is balancing comedy with tension through rhythm, contrast, and tonal misdirection. So would love to hear what your approach was with that.
Yeah, I think there's already a lot of tension on the screen, and I think for a lot of it, it was actually about kind of amplifying it and maybe going slightly sort of like yeah, bigger and more colorful than you would imagine to sort of well, there are some scenes when there's a little girl in the class, the kind of goody two shoes, like the teacher's pet, who kind of discovers what's going on, and she becomes really kind of a kind of evil villain in the film, but in quite a funny way. And so with the music for her, we almost went bolder, and you got this little kid on screen, and there's this big timpani motif for her, and so I think a lot of it was about sort of injecting or bringing out the comedy in those kind of situations, and sometimes scoring it like a horror film, and maybe more of a sort of traditional horror film. Sort of it wears its heart on its sleeve. I think the score more than a lot of more kind of minimal works that I've done. But I think it's about there is definitely that kind of a lot of the music has quite a dark, like the sort of the nuts and bolts of the music, so the harmony and melody and those things on the page are actually quite dark and almost like Renaissance or Baroque, and yeah, very minor, whereas the instrumentation is like a tubax, which is this big giant saxophone, or like flutes, recorders, and almost like circus like instrumentation, like I said, school band gone wrong kind of thing. So like
Sure.
I think that's maybe where the contrast comes as well. The music is quite serious and almost like Vivaldi or like Purcell or those kind of composers, but then matched with quite out there instrumentation and very colorful kind of sounds. Yeah.
Now, Chris, it seems from your body of work, which is quite prolific, and I'd imagine, is it safe to assume that the partnership when you're working with the showrunner or the director, every situation is different? Might there be cases where creatively the director may have the overall idea, but a lot of the heavy lifting until there's a picture to cut to, you have the script. Talk about that balance and that teamwork working with the showrunner or a director, that sometimes they may say, "Hey, Chris, here's the general idea, but it's yours to really build this world sonically."
Yeah, you're right. It's different, I think, on any project. And I suppose if we've worked together before, so like on The Lady, I'd worked with Lee before. So I think maybe it's sort of it's a trust thing a little bit. And so yeah, Lee gave me a lot of freedom, certainly at the beginning, to explore different things and then bring them to him. But yeah, I found that dynamic between, I suppose for TV, often I found producers and exec producers, I guess, yeah, like you said, showrunners, actually get more involved in the music than the director in some cases, because the director's off onto another job by the time I'm working on it properly. So I've had, a lot of really creative relationships with that kind of level. But then on film, it seems very much like the director, especially as I've worked on a lot of films that it's the director has also been the writer, so it's really their baby.
Yeah.
And so I think, but I really like if we can establish that kind of back and forth quite early on. I think that's really important so that you don't go too far. But it's a balance of you need to go down some rabbit holes creatively,
Yes.
and maybe you need a bit of space to do that, but not too far. And I really enjoy feedback and sort of having that. Again, it's like narrowing the possibilities in some ways
Right.
because
Right.
there's so many different ways you could approach something at the beginning, and sometimes you have a really clear vision of that, but then other times I really, it's their original vision, so it's kind
Mm.
of
Mm.
um I like getting their feedback on that as we, as early as possible, really. And yeah.
Yes, I can imagine. It's as a fellow creative, I mean, my hat as a sync agent, it's 50-50 between, getting briefs and then balancing the clearance side. And sometimes, I don't have the benefit of picture to cut to. So I just have to fully just take those words on the paper and hopefully through osmosis deliver the best track potentially. But I'm curious, Chris, as a composer, when is your best work, would you say? Is it in the wee hours, maybe between 11 a.m. and 2? Are you a night person? Are you a day person? To really, when you find that creative spark, really you're just on a roll and you're like, I could work endlessly.
I think I'm more of a night person. I have two young kids at the moment,
Mm.
so I find I've had to readjust a little bit, but I do try and I often do that kind of later stint, like maybe like from 10 p.m. or something, especially if it's towards the end of a project. And I do find that's where I don't know if it's having less distractions, no emails coming in, and so yeah, that's often the time I think where I do my best creative work. But then so much of the job as well is sort of there's still a lot of work to be done. That's you don't have to be in your full like creative mode, I think, and like going through tweaking things or responding to notes and things or little edits here and there. That's can happen more during the day, I think. But yeah,
Right.
something about I've aspired to be like someone who gets. I used to have a composer friend who got up at like 5 a.m. and did 4 hours or something of composing. And he had kids, I think, at the time, young kids, and he would do that, and then the rest of the day was kind of it doesn't matter what else happens because he's done his like 4 hours. I think
Mm.
there's something to be said for that as well if you can do it. And I suppose it's that protected time, isn't it, of without distractions. And I often also sometimes I'm working on a couple of things or maybe finishing off something while I'm starting something new.
Yeah.
Um, so I think as long as they're at different stages of the process, one is maybe getting less creative, more about finishing off and preparing things for the recording, etc.
Yeah.
Um, that's you can kind of split your brain in that kind of more logical and creative way. But I don't know how people do it when they're working on two things really or two or three things, like in parallel.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, fascinating. And it's, you know, I'm always curious. Similarly, do you find with technological advancements, I've dabbled with Logic on the laptop, and I'm sure question is, is that something, can you have that on your iPad? So say you're on a train, you're on the plane, and maybe you're working on something, and maybe you have your laptop at the airport. Is that something where you're like, no, I need to be in my studio where it's completely zero distraction? If you're on the go and on the move as a composer, is there any tech that really helps you kind of with that workflow?
Yeah, you can do a lot on the laptop, I think.
Mhm.
I do miss I'm so used to having it's more the screen actually, the wide, super wide screen with big projects and things like trying to,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I do find it can be quite focusing. It depends on what kind of work, I think. I've rarely like composed things, I think. I've rarely written things outside of the studio. But
Mm.
if it's the stage of the process where you're doing more like edits on stems or more technical stuff, I find that actually the laptop, especially with headphones, can really
Mm.
like zero you in and make you more focused in some ways.
Yeah.
So a laptop and some good headphones that, and it's just sort of a different listening to things on different, not on speakers, on headphones. You kind of notice more maybe, and I'm sure you know, and I often take my laptop on holiday and stuff, and
Yeah.
occasionally I've had like with I've got a little travel keyboard if I need to write a few things, but it is different. I know some people that can do it, that can just write anywhere, but I think it's about having the space as well, isn't it? And sort of, or like, and kind of quite calm, and it's tricky, but no, certainly for like technical stuff on the train, headphones,
You're
laptop.
good to go. 100%. And I'd be remiss if, sort of the closing end topic for our chat to bring up, because I work with a band out of UK called Blitz Vega that had one of the late artists from the Smiths, and that recording was actually recorded in Dolby Atmos, and Dolby Atmos has yet to hit the theaters here. But I know, is it Apple Music? Because your soundtrack for The Lady in Dolby Atmos, I can only imagine what that would be like. But have you recorded any of your productions in Dolby Atmos?
Yeah, not recorded. I don't think we've sort of changed the approach for that. But yeah, for a film where it's actually going to Tribeca, The Long Haul, it's called, and we mixed that in surround, and we tried. Yeah, actually, the space we did it in, it did have a Dolby Atmos setup, so we kind of like experimented with it a bit, and it was really fun. But I think they just wanted a 5.1 surround for that. But
Sure.
I know what you mean. I've recently, I hadn't had AirPods before, until quite recently, and then it's a whole different thing, isn't it? Listening on and even watching TV shows and things with that spatial audio and stuff. It's cool, and it'll be interesting to see, because I know lots of bands are like remastering things, aren't they, for Dolby Atmos, and getting that kind of fully immersive thing. So I think it's the challenge then is just making it work in all forms, and not relying on that to get the vision across. If someone's still just going to be watching it on a phone, or like listening in stereo or something. So that's what I don't envy the kind of mixers that have to think about those kind of trade-offs.
Yeah, I think it's a huge task, because then you're, basically asking the end consumer, assuming those who, don't want to build out their home theater. But it is truly, if it's if the guitar riff is, or if the Roland Juno is going around at 360, and it's almost, it emulates similar, like those virtual, the games that you're put into a different world. But the time flies by, Chris. To share for future, I don't know if you talk about it. Is there anything? What's the rest of the year look like? Is there any projects on the horizon? You don't have to name it if it's under NDA. But is there something that folks can, we'll post up your website, that way they can stay in touch and see what else you might be working on.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I think, I just mentioned, but The Long Haul, this film feature that's going to Tribeca, and I think hopefully we'll have a wider release. It's got Margot Martindale in it. She's brilliant, and it's set in the US actually. So I had a lot of fun learning how to play guitar for that, and experimenting with some kind of textures for that. But so that's coming out, and Bad Apples will hopefully, like you said, later in the year. And I've got a couple of documentary projects. One is actually, a couple are going to be on Netflix, and I don't know how. So one is about Jose Mourinho, who's a football manager, so probably would be a bigger thing in Portugal and the UK, but maybe we'll find a US audience as well. That was a lot of fun. The music is sort of, we recorded an orchestra for that, so it's big classical score for that. So maybe not what you'd expect for a football documentary, hopefully. So that should be coming out very soon, I think.
Very nice. Well, we may have to very well save that for a part 2 check, as with FIFA World Cup here in the US.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, and I'd be remiss, but yeah, it's 2 degrees of Robbie Williams, let's say, because when I was at Capitol in the 90s, Robbie had his The Eagle Has Landed record. And then I think it was a Netflix. I worked on a Netflix. It was Robbie Williams.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That was actually the same director as the Mourinho one. So in some ways a similar character, yeah. The ego.
Okay, fascinating. Well, that'll be the teaser for our next chat because, football, we had David Beckham come over, and with the U.S. and the landscape and the appetite for soccer. And if I'm not mistaken, I want to say, I don't know if Robbie had. I know he plays football, and I couldn't recall if he had ownership in a U.S. team, and or so those are things to unpack next time. But Chris, I really enjoyed our chat today, and grateful for you taking the time out. And I'm a huge fan of your work, and can't wait to continue to stay in touch and hear about your future work and shine a light on your amazing work. So thank you again.
No, thanks for having me. It was great to dive into everything in such depth, and yeah, really fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers, Chris. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll catch you on another episode of Sync Riffs. Click the link in bio and be sure to follow Chris and his amazing work. And until then, we'll catch you on the other side. Namaste.
Go.